It's your opportunity to ask questions, to voice your concerns. Every time we meet in a community, I like to say, don't leave with an unanswered question. Don't leave if you have a concern that is not addressed, because that doesn't do any of us any good. And there's no such thing as a silly question. So at the end, if you have a question or a concern that you're not comfortable with sharing in front of the public, Brandon's going to hang around for a little bit. We do have 2 other events to get to today, but we do want to make sure that if you had a question you didn't want to share in front of the crowd, you can address with them and take some photos. We like to leave time for that also. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Brandon.
Thank you guys so much. This is incredible. This is by far the biggest crowd we've had out toward El Paso, which is fantastic. Thank you guys so much, because it does mean a lot that you guys decided to spend your time out today. And I'm sure you had a lot of things you could be doing today, but you decided to come out here and sit in this room and talk about things that I know I think are important, but the things that you guys clearly know are important as well. And realistically, it's something that I talk about a lot, but I think the reason that I'm here in this room with you guys is the same reason that you also left the house and decided to sit in this room as well, which is that I'm tired, frankly, and I'm frustrated with the actions of my Congressman, Tony Gonzalez. And I know that we cannot continue for another 2, 4, 6, 8 years the way the last 4 have gone. It's just not possible. So before we go down that rabbit trail, believe me, we'll get there. I just wanted to be able to tell you guys a little bit of information about myself, in case this is maybe the first time that you're hearing from me directly, it's your first time hearing what I've got to say, or even worse, the only time you've ever heard from me is in Tony's ads. A little bit of information about myself is, my name is Brandon Herrera. I am a business owner based out of Northwest San Antonio, a firearm manufacturer, firearm engineer, and a constitutional activist, and a Second Amendment advocate. And so a lot of what I've done with the Second Amendment community has, obviously there's a ton of people here that know me from, my ventures on YouTube and things, but it goes a lot beyond that. Whether it was a few weeks ago, I went up to the Capitol in Denver, Colorado, to testify in front of their state legislature against, in my opinion, one of the worst assault weapons bans ever proposed in this country. Completely unacceptable. So I was happy to be invited up there and to testify against their state legislature there. As much as I hate dealing with politicians, I think it was a net positive. And I think it's incredibly important to do stuff like that there, because if you don't do it there and you don't cut it off, then it keeps cascading down this way. Because they'll start in California, they'll start in New York, and then once they get what they want there, that money doesn't just disappear. Those groups just don't disappear. They start spending that same amount of money. Now, they want it there. They spend it in places that they think they can flip next. Virginia, they'll spend it in New Mexico. And then when they get all of those, they'll spend it right here in Texas, fighting at ground zero. We cannot afford to lose Texas. This is proverbially and literally the Alamo. If we lose Texas, we will never have a Republican president again. This is the voting block we absolutely need to keep. The buck stops here. We need to be active here, 100%. But outside of that, even things like last year, Congressman Matt Gaetz and Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene asked if I would testify before a congressional field hearing against the ATF and against ATF overreach. And more importantly, the basis behind which these 3-letter organizations like the ATF are expanding their own power and acting outside of the Constitution to basically legislate without having the authority to do so. No laws being passed by the House, passed by the Senate, and being signed by the President the way that a law is supposed to be. They are amending, they're making rulings on certain things, and they're essentially turning millions of Americans into felons overnight. These unelected bureaucrats who have no power to actually write law are writing law. And that's something we really need to be aware of. So that's kind of where a lot of my actions have been in the last, few years, and it's stuff like that. I've basically been fighting the ATF and things like it for the last decade or so. Because what I do is inherently being in the gun industry. But I would have never told you that I would ever be throwing my hat in the ring and running for any sort of public office, let alone federal Congress. That's insane for me. It's not something I ever saw myself doing, because the one thing I'm not, I told you everything I am. One thing I'm not is a politician. I've never run for office at any time before. I never had an inclination to do so. To be honest with you, the word politician still sounds like a dirty word to me. I don't like it. Because it is. But what really got me involved was paying attention to my congressman and the way he was voting. As you can imagine, from me being in the gun industry and very active there, I pay attention to a lot of firearm law, and I pay attention to the bills being passed and such. And that's when I really noticed Tony Gonzalez for the first time. Because here I am, looking at my congressman to protect my rights, to protect the Constitution, to protect Texas values. And very shortly after he was first elected, he votes for the bipartisan Safer Communities Act. He votes for a gun control bill alongside Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi. What a nerd. And so this is what... That's what really kind of gets me paying attention, because I'm thinking, well, what the heck's going on here? This is a guy who claims to be a hardline conservative, a real Republican, a stand-up guy in all his advertising. And he's voting with Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi to further gun control. And so that gets me paying attention to some of his other votes. Like, I got to keep an eye on this one guy. And then I look at his other votes along the way between then and now, whether it was his vote on $400 million vaccine tracking database, his votes against the family, his votes for taxpayer-funded abortion for the military, or even the fact that he's representing the biggest border district in the entire country, and instead of fighting to secure our border, he's fighting with Republicans like Chip Roy to keep it open. He's trying to kill actual border policy in committee instead of trying to push forward his own. And it's things like that are completely unacceptable, especially right here in District 23. We are ground zero of the border crisis. People who don't live here, who don't know people here, have no clue what it's like. Right. Everybody here either has a story or they know somebody with a story. And people don't realize that they're not around here. Like, I mean, it was actually very entertaining to me to see the mayor of New York, after they started shipping illegals up to New York City, right? And all of a sudden they get over the very thing they're all voting. Their federal representatives are voting to continue. They get overwhelmed with it, and all of a sudden the mayor of New York is on TV talking about how we don't have the infrastructure for this. This situation has to stop. It's like, well, yeah, New York City doesn't have the infrastructure for it. How do you think Del Rio feels? How do you think Eagle Pass feels? How do you think El Paso feels? And so it's messages like these to be put forward, and I've been so disappointed with the way that our representative isn't. He needs to be the frontline #1 voice pushing this stuff forward. And instead, we're relying on other better congressmen to do it for us. And so that's something that I think that needs to change. And instead of somebody that is in this seat representing this district, fighting people like that, fighting real conservatives against real border policy, we need somebody who's going to be an ally to them. Somebody who's going to push it forward themselves. Somebody who's going to not fight with people like Chip Roy, but to fight behind them, to take arrows with them. That's what we need. And somebody who's going to help President Trump if he gets in again. And actually support him on actual border policy and getting this stuff pushed through. And so, my biggest worry, looking at Tony this term, and looking at Tony this election cycle before I decided to get involved, is I was worried that he was just going to walk into a third term. Because unfortunately, there's a lot of politicians and a lot of bad Republicans who just feel like as long as they have an R in front of their name, as long as they call themselves a Republican and put out good mailers and raise a bunch of money, that they'll just get voted in. No matter how much they vote against you, no matter how much they vote against your rights, no matter how much they vote against actual conservative they'll just walk right into office. And unfortunately, they've been right a lot in the past. And they've got nowhere. And I happen to be in a position where my businesses are pretty much self-sustaining now. I had the time, I had the reach, I had the energy. I thought I could give this guy a real fight. And that's exactly what we did, because on March 5th, we sent a message across Texas. Loud and clear. I heard loud and clear in DC, by the way.
Yeah.
No. They don't like me very much up there.
Yeah, we know, wonder why.
Which is fine, because I don't really like them much either. It's okay. But we sent them a message that if you vote against your constituents' will, if you vote against the Constitution, if you vote all the things you claimed you were going to protect, we're not going to go along with it anymore. We're going to challenge you, we're going to primary you, and you're going to win. You will lose your job. And that's the message that we sent. And it has genuinely been humbling and the privilege of my life to be able to, A, not only know that I wasn't alone in that frustration, that I wasn't alone in what I was seeing with my congressman, but B, that on March 5th, you guys put your faith in me and chose me to represent that voice of frustration, that voice of we're not going to take it anymore. And hopefully on May 28th, we're going to take that voice directly to Washington, D.C. Because we need somebody in that office who isn't there to rub elbows, but somebody who's going to throw them at the people who deserve it.
Woo! Yeah.
And this election is going to be weird. I'm not going to lie to you. May 28th is a very interesting election. It's a runoff election. We've basically gotten the majority of West Texas to say 55% to say we want somebody who isn't Tony Gonzalez. Which is it's a great stat for us. It's a terrible stat for an incumbent. Because there were a lot of people in that race. There were a lot of people who showed up on March 5th because they wanted to vote to support President Trump. And they may not have done their research on a lot of down ballot races. They wanted to vote in the presidential primary, but maybe they didn't know all the things that Tony voted for. And a lot of them maybe didn't do their research. That's not the case on May 28th. This is a very specific runoff election where it's going to come down to turnout. And there are not a lot of people that I know, and I'm sure there's not a lot of people that you all know, that are getting out of bed in the morning on May 28th saying, I can't wait to vote for Tony Gonzalez. He's been a great congressman these last 4 years.
Hell no.
Nobody's saying that. So the people who show up to runoffs like this are the people who are upset. And most importantly, they're the people who pay attention. They're the people who do their research. They're the people that look at the data, they look at the evidence. They come to things like this, and they're upset enough that they want to show up in an off election and cast their vote and make their voice heard. And that's the thing that none of the polls are accounting for. That's the thing that I don't think Tony's team is accounting for. And if they were, I think they'd be freaking out a lot more than they currently are. So it's going to come down to turnout. As a friend of mine, Wes Riddell, he's going to be a state representative representing House District 53. He's a great guy. I've worked with him a lot in the past. He's been over to America and things. Great advocate for the Constitution. He's got a saying that the people who run this country aren't the special interests. They aren't the puppet masters behind the strings. The people who actually run this country are the people who show up. The people who make it to the polls, the people who make their voice heard. Because it's easy to complain about things. It's easy to have complaints. It's easy to say, oh, things need to change, or it's all corrupt, or it's all this, or it's all that. It's hard to get out of bed. It's hard to go out and vote. It's hard to go out and show up. That takes effort, which is why the people who are motivated enough to actually go and do the things that actually make a difference run this country.
Yes.
That's why I love to see a big room like this, full of people that were willing to sacrifice their time off, to show up and hear about stuff like this, and ask their questions, and be involved, because that's what this is about. And so I genuinely do appreciate the opportunity to be able to voice that for you, and to be able to be here and represent, I think, real conservative values. The ones that we were promised, not the fake ones we got, but the ones we actually deserve. And so to be able to return that, the biggest thing I want to be able to give you is that when you turn on Fox News, or you turn on C-SPAN, or you read headlines, how votes are going in DC and how your congressman is voting, you don't do what I've had to do for the last few years, which is look at the TV and go, oh God, that's my congressman. I want you to be able to proudly say, that's my congressman. That's somebody who supports the Constitution. That's somebody who supports individual liberties, individual rights. That's somebody who supports conservative values. That's somebody who supports his constituents. That is my congressman. And that's what I want to be able to give you. And so I appreciate you being here. If I had your vote on March 5th, I greatly appreciate that. And if I'm asking for your vote for the first time, I hope I can count on you showing up on May 28th, because the message that we sent to DC on March 5th has got them scrambling. I went from a not serious candidate to a, oh, internet only, oh, this guy's just trying to shake things up, he's just trying to ruffle feathers, he won't go anywhere, to not only putting our congressman in a runoff, but having him so scared that he's begging the Speaker of the House to come campaign for him in San Antonio, excuse me, the future former Speaker of the House. That's the message that we're sending right now. They are terrified. There's a reason he's melting down on CNN. There's a reason he's running all his big money numbers. He's afraid of you. He's afraid of you showing up. And so that is why it's going to be critically important that we do show up. I appreciate you being here today, and I will appreciate your vote when we get this rhino out on May 28th.
Yeah.